When we talk about major historical figures, it's rare to find someone who went through as many profound transformations as Malcolm X. He really wasn't just one person. He was many. His life wasn't some straight line. It was this series of radical reinventions. With each one, he'd shed a past identity to embrace a new, often more challenging truth. And if you really want to understand the man and his legacy, you've got to understand each and every one of those transformations.
So, who was Malcolm X? That's the big question, right? And the answer totally depends on when you asked. To get the full picture, you have to look at the different men he became throughout his life, starting right at the beginning with the name he was given at birth.
He started out as Malcolm Little, but his childhood was just shattered by tragedy. His father, who was an activist preacher, was killed in what the family always believed was a murder by white supremacists. Then his mother, just overwhelmed by grief and the sheer pressure of raising 8 kids all alone, had a breakdown and was institutionalized. Malcolm and his siblings, they were just scattered into the foster care system.
So trying to escape all that, he ends up in Boston and then Harlem. And this is where Malcolm Little, for all intents and purposes, dies. He completely reinvents himself as Detroit Red, a really sharp-dressing street hustler, got the nickname from his reddish hair. He dove headfirst into the criminal underworld. We're talking running numbers, dealing drugs, robbery. He became a man totally shaped by the streets, surviving purely on his wits.
Well, his life as Detroit Red came to a screeching halt with a prison sentence. And ironically, it's in prison that his next and most famous transformation began. He shed the name Little, which he called his slave master name, and became Malcolm X. And that X was such a powerful symbol. It stood for the true African family name that he could never know. This wasn't just a new name, it was the birth of a disciplined, brilliant, and fiery minister for the Nation of Islam.
But his journey wasn't over. Near the very end of his life, one final identity would emerge: El-Hajj Malik el-Shabazz. He took this name after a pilgrimage to Mecca that would completely, radically reshape his entire worldview on race, on religion, on humanity itself. This was his last, and you could argue, his most complete transformation.
So, let's trace this incredible life of reinvention. How did each of these identities build on the one before it? And what does his journey really tell us about the larger struggle for justice in America?
I mean, just look at this timeline. You can see this cascade of events that forged his early worldview. In just a handful of years, his father is killed, his mother is taken away, and his dream of being a lawyer gets crushed by a teacher who tells him that's, and I quote, "no realistic goal for a nigger." Every single trauma pushed him further and further away from mainstream society. By 1946, that path led him straight into a prison cell.
For most people, prison is the end of the road, but for Malcolm, it was a rebirth. It's where he famously educated himself. He literally copied the entire dictionary, word by word, just to expand his vocabulary. It was behind bars that he discovered a totally new kind of freedom, the freedom of the mind and the incredible power of a radical new faith that would finally give his life a singular, focused purpose.
While he was in prison, his brother introduced him to the Nation of Islam, which was led by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Now, for a man who felt so completely betrayed by America, the NOI's message was just electrifying. It preached black pride, black self-reliance, it offered this powerful explanation for generations of suffering, and it proposed a radical solution: complete and total separation from white society.
And right at the core of their teachings was this shocking theological claim. Now, the white man is the devil wasn't just some inflammatory rhetoric to get a rise out of people. It was a core belief tied to the nation's unique creation story that basically recontextualized all of history through the lens of black suffering. For Malcolm, embracing this idea was the ultimate rejection of a world that, from his point of view, had only ever tried to destroy him.
So after he's paroled in 1952, Malcolm X doesn't just join the Nation of Islam, he becomes its most powerful and magnetic voice. His sharp intelligence, that raw charisma, and his absolutely searing critiques of white supremacy, they quickly made him the public face of the entire movement.
And his impact was explosive. I mean, he is largely credited with growing the nation's membership from just a few hundred people to over 50,000 people in less than a decade. That's incredible. He crisscrossed the country, setting up new temples and drawing in thousands of people with his powerful, uncompromising message of black empowerment.
And this table really puts his philosophy in stark contrast with the mainstream civil rights movement. While Dr. King was fighting for integration through nonviolence, Malcolm X was out there preaching separation and the right to self-defense by any means necessary. You're looking at two parallel movements with fundamentally different ideas about the future of Black America.
And he made his disdain for the mainstream movement crystal clear. He famously dismissed the iconic 1963 March on Washington, the one where Dr. King delivered his I Have a Dream speech. He called it the farce on Washington. In his view, it was just a co-opted spectacle, completely controlled by the same white establishment it was supposed to be challenging.
But here's the thing. While Malcolm X was projecting this image of unwavering conviction to the public, behind the scenes, his faith in the Nation of Islam, and especially in its leader, Elijah Muhammad, was starting to crumble. A really deep disillusionment was taking root. His disillusionment grew after a series of what he saw as just deep betrayals. First, he was stunned by Elijah Muhammad's total inaction after the LAPD attacked NOI members. Then came the devastating discovery that his mentor, the man he looked up to, had violated the nation's own strict moral code by fathering children with his secretaries. The final straw was his suspension for that infamous "chickens coming home to roost" comment after JFK's assassination. For Malcolm, it was a pattern of hypocrisy and control he just couldn't ignore anymore.
And on March 8, 1964, he made the break public. This was a monumental risk. He was leaving the only spiritual and political home he had ever known. He immediately founded two new organizations, one religious and one political, signaling that he was ready to forge a brand new path, completely on his own terms.
Soon after leaving the nation, he undertook the Hajj, the sacred pilgrimage to Mecca. And what he saw there completely upended his worldview. He witnessed Muslims of all colors, he said, from blue-eyed blondes to black-skinned Africans, treating each other as equals. And that shattered the core belief he had held for years, that whiteness itself was the devil. As you can see in this quote, he was now seeing the potential for a true brotherhood of all humanity. So, in his final year, as he was building this new, more inclusive, more international vision for human rights, the threats against his life became more intense than ever before. He had made some very powerful enemies, and they were closing in on him.
The campaign against him was immediate, and it was relentless. The Nation of Islam, the very organization he had built, now openly called for his death in its newspaper. His family was sued for eviction from their home. An explosive device was found in his car. And then, just 1 week before he was killed, his house was firebombed while his wife and children were sleeping inside. All those threats became a horrifying reality on February 21, 1965. At the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem, just as he stood up to speak, he was assassinated. 3 members of the Nation of Islam were eventually convicted of the murder. He was only 39 years old, and his lifelong journey of transformation was cut violently, tragically short.
In a powerful eulogy, the actor Ossie Davis gave voice to the profound sense of loss that so many felt. He called Malcolm our shining black prince, and it just perfectly captured the deep love and admiration he commanded, even from people who hadn't always agreed with his methods.
And that leaves us with the final, unanswerable question. For a life that was so defined by constant growth, by constant reinvention, what would have come next? We can only speculate about the unwritten chapters of a man who was, right up until his very last breath, still in the process of becoming.